Okay, are we starting now? All right. So first of all, can I just know how many minutes we have? Like,
So technically, like, what's the time around?
6:30.
Like, it's supposed to finish at what? 7:30, right?
6 to 7:30. So
okay.
an hour, 45.
So I'll say like 30 minutes for me to talk, and then 30 minutes for us to like do like.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Have we prayed? Okay, we have. Oh, sorry. I tapped into that prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So, first of all, shout out to everyone here for being here. And shout out to your able leader, of course, Ayobami, for hosting this, I guess. I think one of the most important things that we can attribute to at least the gap, or yes, basically the gap, is our music compared to other churches, our size at least, or even our age. You know, I was talking to Esther about this a couple of days ago and saying like the things that the Gap has been able to accomplish in the past 4 years with the volunteer force is absolutely insane. You know, like those are things, or these are things that you get full-scale professionals who have, I guess, given their lives, you know what I mean, to do stuff like that. And we're doing that with people. And that just shows, well, I say, the commitment of the people, even in the media team, to get this done. So I really just want to say, I guess from a band perspective, like we really do honor and appreciate y'all. We don't talk bad about you, I promise. Like we, like I've been to churches where it's this versus that. They hate one another, you know what I mean? But we really do appreciate y'all, especially the pictures you take of us. It's absolutely amazing. But I think first things first, like we have to discuss like sound and all that kind of stuff. And I was going to break it down into different aspects. I'll share this note with you as well. But basically, sound is the vibration of air, right? You cannot hear sound in a vacuum. Hence, of course, us being able to hear is dependent on like the air that is around us, basically. And it's depending on two things: amplitude and frequency. And so, I don't know if you guys can come here real quick and we can see something real quick on. So for example, I think we have this example. So this is the aux playing, right? At least this is the music playing. And this is what you would call an EQ, an equalizer, right? An equalizer is basically showing you the frequencies of, I guess, will I say, a sound, right? So if you were to mute that, I don't know if it's possible to mute that real quick, it will be flat. It's flat, right? Now if you play it back, right, you would see that you can see different waveforms populating. Now, of course, starting from here to here, this is lowest and this is highest, right? So I would say something like a bass or a kick drum, those are things that have like oomph to it. They are on the lower side of the frequency, right? And the higher, maybe sometimes even more annoying sounds will be on the higher frequency ranges. Now, the height of these bars are amplitude, which is just showing how loud that frequency is. Does that make sense? So for example, me speaking, I will technically, at least the human range, I'll technically be sitting around maybe 100 to 200 primarily. That does not mean that there will not be low signals, but the amplitude is so low that oftentimes it's inaudible. Does that make sense? So that's frequency and that's amplitude. That's looking at it from an EQ perspective. And now when we go into the mixing board, why is that important? In live music, you have, will I say, a battle of sounds, right? Everyone is struggling to occupy this same frequency. And if a mix board is not introduced to the mix, or at least some form of controlling the amplitude and frequency, you will have what you call noise. Does that make sense? Like if you watch the frequency bar of, will I say, pink noise or white noise, it's just flat all around because it's just all the frequencies put together. It's not separated. Does that make sense? And so when we're dealing with live music, oftentimes you're trying to carve out space for each instrument to dwell in. Now, oftentimes they will overlap, but primarily you want them to be in different frequencies so that you can accurately control them. And that's why we have individual input sources for each sound. Does that make sense? Like it won't make sense if we put one mic on stage and say drums, guitar, you know, everything comes in here, because it's like now we can't separate and actually do like the adequate treatment for each stuff. And a great example of an instrument that just wreaks havoc in almost every church is the drums, right? The drums occupies, let's say, the entirety of the frequency. For example, cymbals are high pitched, correct? So where would they belong? Exactly, right? The kick drum is what? So where would it belong? Where do you think the snares and the toms would belong? In the middle, right? So you can see that it occupies the entirety of the frequency, right? And that's why it's always harder to control drums than any other instrument. Now let's even talk about dynamics. Drums are not just filling the whole frequency, they're also loud. Does that make sense? So amplitude-wise, you would see that frequency-wise and amplitude-wise, drums occupy the entirety of the frequency spectrum, and thus they need more treatment than you'd say like the average instrument. Does that make sense? So for example, let's go to the kick drum. Like if you see an example of what we're doing here to the kick, there's a combination of two things happening in the kick. This is the kick sub and this is the kick through, right? What you're seeing here is an EQ, right? The kick sub is basically saying, I only want the lower end of the kick, and so I'm gonna cut out as much high frequency as possible because I really don't need it. And since I'm combining it with a kick through as well, I'm opening it up back to get just that snap from the kick drum that I need, but I'm still cutting out the low end here. So when we combine them together, it makes a nice thick kick. Does that make sense? Let me give you another example. Let's go to, well, I say the snare. I don't need low frequencies in the snare, right? The kick is already taking that space. In fact, on the stage, the only two instruments that should technically be taking anything less than 60 hertz is the bass and the kick. Those are like the only instruments that you technically have those there. Hence, if you were to look at our EQ for the overheads or our EQ for maybe the floor tom, right? You'd see that it's still opened up here, but the other toms, the keys, the bass is opened up here, the guitar, let's go to vocals. You can see how they're all cut. And obviously, if you're looking at this graph, this is showing like anything that is orange is removed. Does that make sense? You can see how they're all cut because they don't belong there, right? We're making space for other instruments. Does that make sense? All right, cool. Now let's go to the basics of, well, I say mixing. Like we said before, there's so many instruments on stage. And so the benefit of having a board is to take each instrument and treat them. Does that make sense? Like actually put them in the right frequency space and also amplitude. So when we're talking about amplitude, of course, one of the primary ways to control amplitude is just volume, right? That's what the faders are here for. Just like when a lead singer is leading, we put them up, we tuck the BGVs behind, because of course, it's not just frequency that determines how we perceive sound. The loudness is also very important, right? And so let's talk about routing real quick. So on stage now, I think we have maybe 36 or more inputs coming into this board, right? And so that's ranging from the drums, of course, to the bass, to the guitar, the keys, all of that kind of stuff. Now let's talk about inputs real quick. Oftentimes, whenever we're mixing or receiving inputs, we're either receiving it in a mono signal or a stereo signal, right? Mono means one centered. Stereo means it has two images. It has a left and a right. Have you ever listened to music and heard something on your right and didn't hear it on your left? Yeah. That's basically, well, I say panning, where we're not just putting sound in one space now, we're actually putting it in sides. Does that make sense? Right. So for example, I'll give you an example of something that I believe we have panned here. Example. The kick drum is always panned to the center. It's a mono signal, right? The kick is always in the middle. The bass is always also in the middle. But one of the things that is panned left and right will be toms. You can see that the toms, this is saying tom 1 is primarily coming from the left side. This is saying tom 2 is primarily coming from the right side, while floor tom is generally in the middle because it's in the lower frequency, right? Another example would be guitar, but you wouldn't see here because guitar is coming in as a stereo image. At least my guitar is coming in as a stereo image. I have a left signal, I also have a right signal. So when everything is coming in, because it's a stereo image, I'm already panned left to right. Whatever is the same comes out from the middle, but that just means that they will just be the same on left and right. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Any questions on that? No?
When would like sound go towards like the left side versus the right?
For my guitar, let's say I had an effect, like for example, I would run like a delay, right? And that would be programmed in my board already. If I had something like a ping pong delay and I was running it, you would hear the echoes coming from the left and then from the right, but not by virtue of what you're controlling, but by virtue of how I'm sending it. But for the most part, most of the guitar tones would be mono, right? So if anything, you would want to get a stereo signal for keys, especially for maybe post-production and stuff like that in guitar. but no harm is lost. Like if you only had one signal and you could only send one to like the, whatever instrument you're needing. Now let's talk about, okay, mixing. We're doing routing now. We said that sound has different forms, like, will I say frequency, amplitude, and all of those things. Now we have to find a way to get that sound from what's happening on stage here and then back to the speakers, right? So I would say we have, will I say transmitters, receivers, right? Those are like the two primary ways to which you can, will I say, get a sound. So for example, this is a mic, right? I speak into the mic, it converts it to an electrical signal. Now, if I was just holding this mic without plugging it in, it's going nowhere, right? So wires essentially are the way to which we does that make sense? Like we move sound from one part to another. Now, of course, wireless just means that the signal is coded into a wireless signal. Then, of course, we have a receiver in the back that decodes it back to, let's say, an electrical signal. And it's still wired to the stage box in the back, which the stage box comes from all the way here. Now, of course, the benefit of a stage box is that with Ethernet, you can combine 36 signals, send it here, and it will decode it. You all know how snakes are in the back. Like, imagine if we were running all the 6 wires like back here. That would be very painful to watch. You know what I mean? So now, using that knowledge, I think the primary thing that a lot of churches or a lot of issues come about, even just from finding audio, is just routing. Right? Whenever people pick up a mic and it's not working, what's the first thing they do? Like that fixes, like, once you bang something enough times, like it's just, it's like a Nigerian child that just reset. You know what I mean? But that seldom is ever the case. Anyone that does audio or any form of like engineering, you basically just trace it back to the source. Does that make sense? Like the first question we should be asking is, are the batteries on? Like, can this receiver actually, transmit something? You know what I mean? And then, okay, let's say the batteries are on. Is the receiver on in the back? Right? Okay, if the receiver is on, is the stage box at the back on?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, then the sound goes from stage box to the mixer. Is the mixer on? Okay, the mixer is on. Are the speakers on? Exactly. Those are like things that once you just follow signal flow, if something is not working, it's because there's an open circuit. Yeah. Like there's just something that is missing. Does that make sense? Like it never is banging the thing. You get what I mean? Right? So let me give you an example of like our routing. So this is obviously like the wing that we're using. A lot of churches, if you are able to master the wing, you can master almost any board, to be honest. Yeah. It's very flexible, very easy to use. And it's part of the Behringer system, which is also the same as a Midas system. So honestly, if you watch a couple of YouTube videos on this, to be honest, a lot of things are basically the same, right? So I would go to the wing, right? And I want to figure out where the signal is coming from. So I can go to routing, which is right here, right? So you can see that it's telling you the source group is AES50A, which is the name of the stage box in the back, right? And it's telling you that for number 1, we're picking it up from the kick, right? Number 2 at the back, like if we were to go to the stage box in the back, you'd see numbers for each XLR input, right? And this is basically it, like right here. Does that make sense? Right. Of course, the benefit of this board is it's very flexible. You don't have to route every single thing here, back here. You can mix and match. Like for example, we're running music here and it's coming straight here, which is very beneficial. But that's basically an example of routing, right? So for example, one of the things that took a lot of time when we were doing the live recording is because we had to reroute everything.
Yeah, we did.
Like, right? And so routing obviously is something that once you do it once, you probably don't want to ever do it again, And so I would say a lot of times the problem is not essentially, I say the routing on the board. It's probably just an open signal or like an open chain somewhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So for example, let me just give you an example of, let's say I want to create, let's say Mano comes with, I don't know, a tambourine and he wants us to mic it. Like very creative guy, I love him, man. I'm like, wow, okay. We've never mic'd a tambourine in this church before, but there's always a first time for everything. We're like, okay, should we give him a plug, like an XLR input, or should we give him a mic? What do you guys think?
A mic.
A mic.
A mic.
Unless it's an electric tambourine that just finally has like the gift of, you know what I mean? Like, tambourine is an acoustic instrument, which would probably need a mic, right?
Yeah.
So let's say we were to get him a mic now. Do we just give him a mic and say good luck?
No.
Like, what's the next thing?
We had to like put it on the tambourine.
Exactly. And then after that,
You have to connect the
Connect
mic
it
to
to
the
like-
snake or to the snake.
exactly. We have to take the signal, unless it's a wireless mic, which is technically still be connected to the snake in the back. We have to, if we're giving him a wired mic, we need to connect the mic to the stage box in the back, correct? We have to find some space in the back, plug it in, and then we know what the number is at the back, correct? Like we're like, okay, we plugged Mano into number 12 on the stage box in the back,
Okay.
right? So now we're gonna come here and we're gonna find like an empty spot. So for example, this is not named, this is not labeled. So I can select this one and I can say, I want to make this Mano's mic now, right? So if I was to go home, I can see that this is a blank template. This is a signal flow for a Mano that is empty. So first of all, we first need to give him an input. So where's the source gonna come from? Is it gonna be local in?
No, A50.
Exactly, because local in is talking about some inputs that we have in the back here,
Yeah.
right? And that's not what we need. We need to go to the AES 50, sorry, not USB, right? And then we can see what's already connected in the back.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Now, let's say that we said that Mano was, what did we say his number was again? Number 12. So we'd click on number 12, which is, I don't want to use number 12 because it mess up guitar. Oh, Jesus. Okay, let's say he was 17. This is A17, by the way, not Mic 7, A17. But we named him Mic 7. We would come here and would click on this, and now this channel is routed to Mano. Does that make sense? That make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So I'll just do close, and now everything here is to edit to make sure that Mano comes out in the best light from the speakers, right? So first of all, EQ wise, we would ask ourselves, it's very easy to Google, what is the frequency spectrum of a tambourine, right? Pretty high, right? We might not need a lot of sub coming from, exactly, right? So I'll just say, you know what, Mano, we bless God for your life, but right now, we don't really need a lot of low-end information from you. And that just means I'll low cut. Now, depending on what frequency, this was a low cut button, by the way.
There's a button for.
Yeah, there's a button for.
Wow.
Yeah, now you could edit how low you want to cut him, like out of the mix, basically. So let's say I would say, I don't need you up to like 350. I just need that high. That's it, right? Then I can come here as well and even do more detailed cuts or even amplification of, will I say, like Mano sound, right? Shout out to Mano if you've ever watched this. But now, look, you can see these buttons. I can basically say, I want a lot of 400 from you, Mano. Or I actually don't want any 400 from you. Like, or I want a lot of 4K from you. I don't want any 4K from you. This is how you just start cutting. Does that make sense? Right? Because oftentimes, number one, the source is very important. Like, if you're ever doing any post-production, you realize that the reason a lot of these churches spend so much money on their mics and all those things is because if you get it wrong from the source, like the rest of it is just like, it's a loser's game. Like you're cooked. You know what I mean? Like if you listen to some of it,
The all recorded version.
if you listen to, oh my God, be praised. It's still, oh my God. Pain. Because it was just a bad mic.
Really?
It was a bad mic. It was a terrible mic. Like there was no recording. Like no audio engineer would ever pick up the mic and say, let's go record with this. Like, it was just bad. And so there was really nothing we could do post-production to fix what is already bad. Yeah. Does that make sense? Right? So remember that whenever we're miking stuff, that's why we never tell singers to grab their mic and do this and then expect us to get like a good recording of them. Does that make sense? Like the source is equally, well, I say the source is 80% of the work, 20% is just post-production. Does that make sense? Right? So all of this low cutting and all of that kind of stuff.
A lot of work you've done in post-production.
No. like if you listen to a lot of Bethel's mixes and stuff like that, why do they sound so good live? Like if you just watch their live stream, half of it is just crowd mics.
Wow.
Like that's it. Like it's just picking up such great sound from the congregation. Like the mix engineers just turning up and turning down stuff, right? Does that make sense? Right? So now we've done like a lot of EQ for, well, I say, mono, right? Mic 7. Now I'm saying, sorry, before we even go into that, let me just touch on something real quick. Gain. Gain is very important. Gain is basically saying how open should the tap be or how close should the tap be, right? If I bring up the gain for this a lot, let me give you an example. Where's my gain? Okay, this is my input gain, right? It's basically like a boost, if that makes sense. It's like, let's say someone is whispering, I could turn up their gain, but the thing is, after you turn up gain, you can't turn up gain in post-production. Does that make sense? Exactly. Gain is basically behind the audio. You can't undo gain. Like I can undo a fader control, but I can't undo gain. That's why it's just good to get the gain correctly first and just like leave it how it is. Does that make sense? Like it's better for someone to, will I say, come to the church and you tell them, hey, I need to reduce your volume from your guitar, like amp itself, versus me having to turn up and turn down gain. Does that make sense? Because post-production, I can always increase your volume. But if your gain is already too hot and you distort, the sound is not really recoverable. Does that make sense? Right. So that's gain. Then we go to EQ. Now we go to compressor. And I like to think of a compressor like a amplitude control. Remember that EQ is basically a frequency control. Compressor is primarily an amplitude control, right? And you have to think about it this way. It's almost like a mother, right? And she says, if you scream past this level, I'm gonna smack you, right? Just think about it that way, right? A compressor is basically saying, I will only let this amount of audio come through. After it gets over this threshold, I will start to reduce it by the magnitude of the ratio you give me. So, for example, let me give you, for example, this is the compressor that comes with the wing. Of course, the wing has different compressors on here, but we'll just use the primary wing compressor, for example. Actually, let me go to this aux that is running right now, and can you turn up the volume a little more? We don't have any compressor on this because, I mean, the audio is already mixed and mastered from there. All we need to do is turn up volume and down. But if a very dynamic instrument was coming through, can you see this line right here? This is showing the volume of the audio coming through, right? Now, if I'm saying to myself, before 40 dB, I don't really want much from you. Of course, don't forget to turn on the compressor if you actually want it to work. but I would say, this is the threshold. This is the ceiling that the mother is giving the sound and saying, if you get past this, that's when I'll actually start working on you, right? Now, if I start moving here, you'd start seeing what's happening. It's getting quieter because you can see something going on here. What is happening? It's gain reduction. It's slamming it down. And if I say to the ratio of 20:1, you can see that it's even getting less because now it's saying for every 20 decibels you go over, I'm gonna smash it down to 1. Does that make sense? So obviously something that would be more forgiving is 3.5 because I'm reducing it by a ratio of 3.5. Anything more than that is considered, I say, aggressive. Now, of course, you're not really going to find yourself cranking through compressors like during like a worship service and stuff like that. But it's always good to know like what a compressor actually does. It provides a ceiling and then it basically like reduces amplitude by magnitude of what the ratio is. Now, of course, I'm just going to turn this off so that it doesn't actually affect like the music and stuff like that, but we don't have that.
So it doesn't affect anything now?
No. Yeah. Right. Now that it's all
exactly
right. I'm gonna give you another example of compressors that we use. For example, on all of our mics, you'd see that we have the red compressor that's just running default. And if you were to Google it, you'd see like compression ratios for vocals is usually around 3.5. That's just like the sweet spot, basically, right? And if we can grab a mic, I don't know, like any mic, and talk to and through it. One of the basic, one of the great things about a compressor is that it gives you evenness of sound. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we know singers that they'll be whispering sometime and then they'll be shouting sometime. And if you don't want to be just, cranking up and going down, you're saying, please, just Manu, give me between 10 decibels and 0, right? What mic are you using?
Yellow.
Okay, so mic yellow. Can you talk into it?
Hello.
Now, you can see that nothing is happening on this, right? This is the meter, right? Obviously, the other one was like a, well, I say like a graph, but this is more like a meter. This is just basically simulating like older like compressors that were based on tubes. Can you scream? Can you see how it's moving? Depending on how loud he goes, keep going. I'm gonna just reduce the volume here, but keep going though. Keep, keep going. Can you see? The high, thank you. The higher he goes, the more the compressor says, hey, relax. You know what I mean? Right? So it really just gives us like a lot of dynamic control over like, well, I say sounds. Does that make sense?
Does it bring things up too?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So what we have right now on the compressor is a gain, called makeup gain. So the positive thing about it is that whenever signal comes into this, I've given it 5 decibels of boost. So he's singing with 5 decibels extra. Now, after that 5 decibels, so even if he's whispering, it's still coming through. But after he starts singing past, well, I say the threshold that we have here as negative 23 dB, the compressor is going to start saying, hey, bro, stay within this range that has been given to you. Does that make sense?
So is there some sort of like floor ceiling?
What?
Like, is there some sort of floor? Like,
Yes. So, let's say the floor for the what they call compressor is nothing, if that makes sense. Like the floor technically from this compressor is starting at 5 dB, because the vocal is +5 as of right now. The compressor does not move a single inch or anything until you pass threshold. After negative 23 dB, the compressor comes into effect. And one of the positives of all of this is that, of course, all of this effects and EQs that you're getting from this, the only thing that actually affects the raw signal being recorded there is gain. So all this compression, all this EQ, all of that kind of stuff, it doesn't affect anything we record here. Like the only thing that would affect like a good recording technically is the quality of the mic that you're using, of course, and this gain that we used to, exactly, the gain on the mic itself. Aside from that, all of these effects are bypassed whenever we're recording.
So
This is just for the house. Now, of course, when I'm mixing, I'm also using compressors, I'm using EQs, but remember that now we're mixing for people's listening experiences with headphones and cars and all that kind of stuff. We're mixing, this is a totally different space. Does that make sense? Right. Exactly. What you need in a house, what you need in like a congregation is not the same thing as what you need. Like as I was listening to Sick Fest, that's not what we're hearing on the day. It was a different experience. You get what I mean? Like there's a reason when they say, oh, just the crowd, all of a sudden you start hearing people. Before they were not in the mix because they were not needed at the point. You know what I mean? Right? So that's just like amplitude, speaking, frequency, and all that kind of stuff. And then let's just talk about the output real quick, and then we can go into like questions, concerns, rude remarks, and all that kind of stuff. Now, for us to be able to hear anything, we
Can
need.
you also like show us like Logic Pro?
Oh yeah, I got you. Now, for us to be able to hear, we need amplification, correct? Right? Of course. Let me give you an example. Black Boy is one of the loudest singers I know. Love her to death. But I'm sorry, man. Once EJ starts playing, you've lost. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way she can outbeat EJ when it comes to just sound, right? And that's why we have speakers, right? Yeah. Speakers are basically just taking whatever we've done to each individual signal, compiled together, and sent back into the house. Now, of course, we have 4 sends here for our speakers. We have, obviously, it looks like those main ones, those main wedges that we have there. Of course, we have the center of fields, which are those ones on the floor. We have the stage, and then we have the sub. So they're all named accurately. And one of the great things about having 4 is that if I was to do something like this, select and send on fader, you can see what I'm sending to each individual speaker. Like if I was to select fill, stage, sub. Like you can see what's going to what, if that makes sense. Hold on, what's going on here?
What's that?
1 second. Send on fader. Okay, this is a lesson for all of us then, I guess.
Something not sent to aux?
Yeah, 1 second. This. Let me go back to main matrix and let me click on sub. Okay, so great example. This should not be the case.
And that's on the what? That's on the cells?
What did I do?
Turned off
The sender. The center.
To what?
You just turned it off.
To the subs, right?
To the subs.
Wait, I have a question. Because luckily we've been having this issue during service.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is on topic or anything, but on here, so on the drums, we are getting input from all the mics on all the drums. So whenever I turn down the drums, or if we turn down the drums, all the microphones, like all their volume automatically goes like down as well.
That's a good one. Let's talk about two things that are relatively the same but different, right? So there's buses and then there is DCAs. Think about a bus as different pipes in your household coming through one place, right? So for example, what we have here for, well, I say the sub that we were talking about is technically a bus. Like we're sending everything in relatively different volumes to the output of a sub. Now remember that when I say sub, I'm talking about frequencies from maybe like 60 to, let's say maybe 100. Do vocals belong there?
No.
So that's why I muted them. Like vocals, like, I'm sorry, we don't have a bass singer here that's going to, you know what I mean? And even then, they don't belong there. Does that make sense? So if I was to do a send-on fader for my my sub, so main matrix send-on fader, and I was to select this, right? Technically, I should not be seeing vocals, right? Right? The only things that should be sending to sub are what?
Drums.
Exactly, right? Kick, maybe floor tom, and the bass.
Okay.
Like those are the only things, and maybe a smudge of keys, because obviously like keys, like they do take a great amount of space. And one of the things I'll do is, let's say I was playing keys and we didn't have a bassist, I'll open up the EQ for the keys so that I can play key bass. Does that make sense? But I'll cut that right back. If we were to look at the mix for keys, you can see that it's cut right here because the bassist belongs there. Does that make sense? So let's go back to the sub and let's do some cleaning up real quick. We said to ourselves that we don't need vocals in the sub. In fact, we can just do this, right? So we know that whenever we turn up sub here, what's coming out more? Just bass and just bass and kick. Does that make sense? Right? Now, same thing for stage. Do I really need kick if someone is standing right next to the drums? Right? There's some things that are just like intuitive, right? So if I was to do like a send for it, like you see that, in fact, for the most part, you can see that most of the drums are like taking out of it. It's mostly just a little bit of instruments and a lot of vocals. Because the stage wedge or the mix is for the vocals. And what they would want to hear is themselves. Like we have our P16s, our in-ears for a reason. Does that make sense? Like if we were mixing for like the entire band itself, like we'd say, okay, we probably should add like some bass, some kick and all that kind of stuff, but the stage singers just want to hear themselves. Does that make sense? Now, when we're talking about fills and front, now who are we mixing for? The congregation. So they actually have to hear everything except for talkback, of course. Right? And so now we're playing with the mix and we're saying, okay, how much kick should be coming out from the house? Does that make sense? Should the toms be that loud? Right? Obviously, lead vocals has to sit above everything, but can we get a little more keys? Does that make sense? Right? And that's whenever you're mixing, like, of course, you're not doing a select send-on fader, but whenever you're just doing without a send-on fader, for the most part, now you're mixing for the house. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So remember that a bus is everything routed through what? One output. Now a DCA is, well, I say time-saving, it's a time-saving knob. I would not always reach for a DCA unless you really need to do something quickly, right? Because what a DCA is doing, exactly what a DCA is doing is, a DCA is not caring about buses or anything like that. A DCA is basically saying everything that belongs to drums, as like for example, if I was to press and hold, you can see everything that belongs to this DCA. If I wanted to add more to it, I'll just select it, right? That means that I just want to cut out the whole drums. Like I don't want to come here and start reducing kick first or any of that kind of stuff. Like that's why I said like it's a time-saving knob, but it's not always the best. Because there's not control, right?
That's what I was saying. It did.
Then it means that is the aux in the DCA. Hi-hat is in DCA. Let me see. Hold on. No.
Because we had this issue like.
Yeah, right. Like,
Charles, you remember Deeper Night?
yeah.
Yeah, something is definitely coming through the drum DCA because we're still getting the signal even when the drums is not coming up.
Yeah.
So let's check that real quick. Let's see, this should be, yeah, that should be part of it. Bus, okay, we have that. Let's see, what else is in our buses? Socks in ears. Ooh. Even why are we getting stuff from Socks?
Is it a routing problem?
I think it's a routing problem. Because right now we're getting stuff from... Is the Socks mic there?
No, I can usually text it or just usually text it.
So we shouldn't be getting anything from Socks mic itself. Okay. So if we were to even try and like decode this, we would have to say what is being sent to bus 11. So for example, I'll come here. Sorry, this is just a quick... So I'll find bus 11, right, which is Socks, and I'll just click this and I'll do send on faders. So this is send on faders, and what I should not be getting, of course, this makes sense, right? Socks in your monitor should not be having anything here, right? It should just be, I don't know why aux is being sent there.
But watching the Socks in here is not having
Yeah.
anything is in like...
It should just be Socks, if that makes sense, right? So technically it should just be this. But I don't want to change it until we actually have all the musicians here, if that makes sense. Because I think we might have done something for the live recording and just never reverted it back.
That's what I'm thinking.
I'm scared.
It took that long to edit.
I'm scared. I'm scared it might have made sense when we did it. But let's just get back to DCAs real quick. So DCAs are, well, I say the cost-effective way or the time-effective way of, well, I say adjusting volume. Does that make sense? Right, same thing for band, same thing for vocals. And I think it's very important that whenever we're mixing, especially for the house, for example, yesterday or on Sunday when I was standing in the congregation, I was like, first of all, I did not know that this is what they hear. But one of the things I realized was that I could not hear drums from the speakers. I could hear drums from the drums. Does that make sense? Like, so when they said just the drums, now I started hearing drums from the speakers. Until yesterday I came and I saw like, oh wow, it looks like we all just reduced the volume for the drums entirely. Which I understand. Thank you, Jesus. Let's talk about this real quick. So, whoever's watching this, and for everyone here, first of all, we honor and we appreciate you. But I think one of the things we need to establish is an order of events and what is priority. When someone is praying, of course, we want to hear them. And I understand that when people are praying, you guys tend to maybe reduce the DCAs for the band and the drums, but forget to bring it back up during worship.
Yeah.
Right? And what I was thinking about was, there's a reason you guys have this here. Like, you can actually talk to us. Like, I'd rather you say, hey, musicians, can you guys bring your volume down before I have to take you down myself? Does that make sense? Like, hey, can you guys bring your volume down? Exactly. Right? So it's like we're communicating like, hey, man, we're about to go into this. The preacher is preaching. Drums, you're just a little too loud. Like, can you just ease up on your cymbals? You know what I mean? Like, simple things like that, because we're trusting you guys to be the ears back here. We can't hear what's going on here. You know what I mean? Everyone has their own individual mix in their ears, and to them, they sound great. You know what I mean? But in the house, the prayer warrior is struggling. She's warring against the drums. You know what I mean? You get what I mean? And so you're saying, "Hi, Obama is suffering." No, I mean, EJ, do you mind just you understand? Because let's say, for example, even when you were to reduce him here, you can't undo what the cymbals are doing. Like, the cymbals are just generally loud. You know what I mean? And I don't know if I've played with any of y'all here, but it's like half the time, like, my job is just saying, hey guys, let's relax. Like, let's just take it a notch down, because we have a small space. And there's a reason, like, a lot of people have noise isolation and all that kind of stuff, because even in a small space, noise just, like, it bounces around. It has nowhere to go. Does that make sense? And so I think, order of service wise, I think it's very important that you're communicating whatever you're doing to us. Does that make sense? Like, not every time, of course, I'm turning up lead singer now. No, no, like, we don't need to hear that. You know what I mean? But like this stuff, like, oh man, the band is just a little too loud. You know what I mean? And if you were to take down the DCAs here, like the same person has to remember that when worship starts, I beg, release us from your shackles. like we're in jail now. You know what I mean? Like nobody just wants to hear vocals. Like unless we're doing an acoustic set, like give us some keys. You know what I mean? Like give us some bass, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But yeah, so that's buses and that's DCS. Any questions on that? Questions on that?
Just the buses and DCAs.
Yeah, or anything in general.
You said the DCAs were just time effective.
Exactly, like volumetric controls. Yeah, right.
So we could always make DCAs for different things, right?
Yes, you can do DCAs for it. Like as long as you select this and you press whatever you want here, you're sending it to a DCA, if that makes sense, right? So, yeah, man, have at it. I've not seen, aside from maybe drums, band, and vocals, I guess they could be, I don't know, if we have like different auxes running or something like that, like that could be something that, you know, makes a lot of sense to do. And I think even on buses, let's talk about one more bus. Of course, like you can find buses here that are technically called bus masters, right? And they're right here. You can see drum, verb, vocal reverb, delay. Those are like, and sax delay and sax reverb. Those are like the primary effects that we use technically on, like say, vocals or drums or whatever, you know what I mean? And these things just create what I say a sense of space in a mix. Like if you want something to sound far, you add a little more reverb. It makes you feel like, let's say you're in a cave or in a hollow space and stuff like that. And if you listen to a lot of somber music, like the Bethels, like I Am the One You Love, you're like, why does this feel so sweet? There's a lot of reverb. There's just like they just slap it in there. You know what I mean? While delay is something like an echo. It's like, and I think delay is something that is, when you use it tastefully, oh man.
Sounds so good.
Let me give you an example. Where's your mic?
With like any on the Sunday or Wati.
Exactly. Like so, for example, if we were to go to the delay, for example, this is the effect on the delay, right? We have there are different delays you can use.
Tap.
Yes, exactly. There are different delays and effects that we use, but at least for this one, we're just using this delay. Did I just cancel it? I think I just did. No. Hold on. I think I just did. Okay, there we go. So, is it on?
Testing.
1 second. First of all, DCA looks like it's fine. What mic is that?
Yellow.
Mic yellow. Okay, so it is muted, right? Cool. So let me unmute these. All right. You see, so that's how we solved it easily. I was like, oh, if it's working, then it has to be from the board or something like that. So now let's go to our our bus master, right? If I was to do, remember, what is a bus?
It's just multiple channels.
Exactly. So if I was to do send on fader here for this bus, we can see what is being sent to varying degrees, right? Now, you can see that the musicians are like, we don't necessarily like, we insist that you don't actually give us, you know what I mean? Like the only person that might need delay is guitarist. Like if he's using acoustic, I already run like a lot of my stuff through my board, so I don't even need delay. I should be muted. Like let's say Mano was playing and Mano didn't come with an EQ effects pedal or something like that. You can say, okay, Mano does need a tad bit of delay. But remember, after we mute it for the next person until they show, you know, what they have and what they don't have. So we've looked at delay now. We're saying that this bus for delay, we're sending all of it to vocals. Like vocals is being sent to a delay, will I say, bus. So talk.
Hello.
Keep going.
Hello.
Now the volume for this is very low, so keep going. If I wanted more, I'll turn him up here, and then I'll come here, and then I'll say, where's the tab? I think it's this, right? Keep going.
Testing. Hello.
Keep going. I'm trying to make it even slower. Now stop. Let me mute the vocal. Where's the? Yeah, let me mute the aux real quick. Where is it again? There we go. Okay, let's mute that. Now let's go back to this. Let's do our send on faders. Let's go back to our lead. Sorry, I selected the wrong one. All right, let's do that again. So speak.
Hello.
Now, there is, say that again.
Hello.
Can you hear that? It was, I timed it for when it should come. Does that make sense? And so that's the benefit of the tap tempo. So for example, let's say we're doing God is good all the time, right? You're tapping it based on it so that
that's the song. That's the same song Mr. Andrew used to teach me. That I'm not even going to lie.
Really?
Yeah, that's how I told
God is faithful. Though.
When I learned how to use it.
So you're basing your delay on. Does that make sense? And I'd say the best time to use delays is when you find an empty place. Does that make sense? So let's say, so we lift you high, Yahweh, Yahweh. There's a space right here. Then we lit, but you don't want the echo to be coming when the person is singing. Does that make sense? It's more of a tasteful thing than it is drown us with delay for the rest of the service. And we're just like, is she still talking or are we hearing? You know, is the spirit just really heavy here? You know what I mean? Like, and it's the same thing for reverb, right? Like when pastor is preaching, for example, I think the preacher mic is not really even sent to like reverb like that or something like that. Exactly, right? But when someone is like singing a really solemn song, you need more reverb than when it's really fast paced. Because when it's fast paced, there's already so much energy being built up. There's no space for so much reverb. Does that make sense? Very slow songs is where, and that's why whenever you're mixing, you're thinking of what does this situation and room need? Does that make sense? Like that's the first question you should be asking yourself, not, I just feel like we should just throw in reverb here. You know what I mean? So mixing is more about asking questions and removing things that shouldn't be there as opposed to actually just trying to like be overly creative, you know what I mean? And just like, and it's simple communication. I think the gift that we have in this church that many churches might not have is that the distance from the stage to the mix, or at least the distance from the stage to this console is so small. We should be like a well-oiled machine. You know what I mean? Like, I think by God's grace, maybe before the end of this year, we should get to a place where if I'm having an issue playing, like we have, like you guys are so in tune with the music or the musicians that it's like, I think he has a problem. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like even the camera people should be watching, like as you're videoing me, do I look like I'm struggling? Right? You know what I mean? Like we shouldn't have to say, somebody call, you know what I mean? Like it's a very small church. And so it's like, I don't know, maybe stage managers or something like that. Like just trying to cater to, like say, the sound, even from the source. Does that make sense? Because then if we're able to, well, I say, create freely, effectively, the singer doesn't have to shout because she's hearing herself, all that kind of stuff. When it's time to mix, the mix engineer is just having fun. It's like, man, like